I stepped into the conference room and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The mahogany table was covered in neat stacks of paper. A single envelope sat in the center, my name written in my father's careful hand. My mother didn't look at me. David leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his palm. Elaine stared at her folded hands like she was praying. I took the only empty seat. The air smelled like old leather and something colder I couldn't name. Mr. Carlyle, our family's lawyer, lifted the envelope without meeting my eyes. When he spoke, his voice was steady but final. Your father left everything to you alone. No one moved. No one spoke. In that stillness, I felt something break loose inside me, something I wasn't ready to name. For a moment, I wondered if I had heard him wrong. But then my mother let out a small, clipped laugh that sounded more like a cough. David's pen hit the table with a sharp click. Elaine didn't look up. No one offered an explanation. I felt heat rising in my chest, a pressure I couldn't swallow. I searched their faces for any sign of understanding, any hint this was some terrible mistake. But I saw only disbelief and something harder, resentment. The room seemed smaller with every second. I could hear the old radiator humming behind me. The curtains were drawn tight against the afternoon sun. I thought about standing up and leaving, but my legs refused to move. Mr. Carlyle cleared his throat. Your father's wishes were clear, he said, and that was the moment I knew nothing between us would ever be the same again. I looked at the envelope again, as if it might vanish if I blinked. My father's handwriting felt like a fingerprint pressing into my chest. I thought of all the years he spent building the community center. The late nights, the small donations stretched further than they should. How he believed it mattered more than any house or account balance. David exhaled sharply like he was tired of the silence. So, you're telling us he gave her the whole thing? He asked, his voice flat. Mr. Carlyle nodded once. The center, the funding to maintain it, the personal accounts connected to its operations. Elaine's shoulders sank. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt a dull ache bloom behind my ribs. This wasn't about an inheritance, it was about trust. And he had given it to me whether I was ready or not. David didn't bother hiding his anger. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low and clipped. This is ridiculous, he said. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was sick. My mother finally looked at me then. Her eyes were cold the way they got when she wanted to end a conversation before it began. You know he wasn't himself, she said. You spent too much time filling his head with ideas. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I wanted to remind her he was lucid until the end, that he had planned every detail with purpose, but my voice stayed stuck in my throat. Elaine shifted in her chair, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. No one spoke in my defense. I realized they had already decided I didn't deserve any of it. Not the center, not his faith in me. I closed my eyes and let their voices fade. In my mind, I was 8 again, following my father through the echoing halls of the center. He carried a box of canned food in one arm and held my hand with the other. The building smelled like old books and pine cleaner. I used to think it was the safest place in the world. He would crouch beside me and say, "Someday you'll understand why I built this. It's not about money. It's about what you leave behind." I had believed him, even when everyone else called it a waste of time, a drain on the family. Even when my mother rolled her eyes every time he missed dinner because a single mother needed help. The memory settled over me like a shield. I opened my eyes, steadying my breath. I wasn't ready to give any of this up. My mother sighed as if I were a child refusing to behave. She folded her hands neatly on the table and spoke in that calm, cutting tone she used when she was most angry. "You always thought you were better than the rest of us," she said. "You thought your little projects made you noble." Her words landed like stones in my chest. I kept my gaze fixed on the edge of the table, tracing the worn groove in the wood with my thumb. "You don't know how to run a household," she continued. "You don't understand what real responsibility looks like." David nodded, a humorless smile tugging at his mouth. Elaine shifted again, but still said nothing. I swallowed hard. In that moment, I saw it clearly. No matter what my father had written, they would never believe I deserved his trust. David reached into a leather folder and pulled out a stack of papers. He pushed them across the table until they stopped in front of me. "This is a proposal," he said evenly. "A fair redistribution so everyone gets what they're owed." I didn't touch them. The words on the cover blurred as my pulse climbed higher in my ears. Elaine finally looked up, her eyes darting between us. She didn't look angry. She looked tired, like she'd been dreading this moment as much as I had. My mother tilted her chin, watching me with a practiced calm. As your family, she said, we're offering you the chance to do the right thing. I lifted my gaze to meet hers. There was no warmth there, just expectation sharpened to a point. No one raised their voice. That almost made it worse. David leaned back, arms crossed over his chest. We all know he was too sentimental, he said. He would have wanted us to decide together. Elaine swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. We could split everything evenly. It would be simpler. I felt the old ache behind my ribs, the familiar guilt they always knew how to find. They were making it sound so reasonable, so polite. My mother's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. You can still fix this, she said. You can show us you care about the family. The papers sat between us like an ultimatum. All I had to do was sign and lose the last piece of him I had left. I let the quiet stretch between us. No one moved to break it. The radiator clicked and hissed behind my chair, the only sound in the room. I placed my hand on the stack of papers but didn't pull them closer. I wanted to say something that would make them understand that this wasn't greed, that it was about protecting what he built. But I knew they wouldn't hear it. They had already decided the story. Elaine dropped her gaze back to her lap. David stared at me like he was memorizing my failure. My mother just waited, perfectly composed. I took a slow breath. Then I folded the papers shut, pushed them back across the table, and met her eyes without blinking. I need time, I said, my voice steady, even though my hands weren't. David scoffed, but I didn't look at him. My mother arched an eyebrow. Time for what she asked, as if this is a complicated decision. I stood up slowly, careful not to let the chair scrape the floor. I won't be rushed, I told her, and I won't be bullied. Elaine opened her mouth like she might speak, but nothing came out. I looked at her a moment longer, hoping she'd say something that felt like support, but she just lowered her eyes again. Mr. Carlyle cleared his throat. If you prefer any further discussions, can go through my office. I nodded once, then I turned and walked out, feeling the weight of every step in my chest. When I got home, the quiet felt too big to hold. I set the envelope and the folder on the coffee table and sank into the couch. The afternoon light slanted across the floor, catching the edge of my father's handwriting. I thought if I looked at it long enough, it might tell me what to do. I rested my palms on my knees to keep them from shaking. All I could hear was my mother's voice repeating in my head, "You don't know what real responsibility looks like." But she was wrong. I knew exactly what it looked like. It looked like my father, working late, giving away more than he kept. It looked like sacrifice. I leaned back and closed my eyes. For the first time since he died, I felt completely alone in the world. The phone rang just after sunset. I let it buzz across the table twice before I picked it up. Elaine's name glowed on the screen. For a moment, I almost didn't answer, but I pressed it to my ear anyway. Her voice was thin and unsteady. "I didn't want it to happen like that," she said. "I swear I didn't." I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to ask why she hadn't spoken up. "I can't stand in the middle," she whispered. "David, Mom, they think you're making everything harder." I swallowed hard. "You think that too?" I asked. She didn't answer. The silence on the line was worse than if she'd said yes. When she finally hung up, I set the phone down gently, and for the first time, I wondered if I'd already lost them all. I sat there for a long time after Elaine's call ended. The living room felt like it belonged to someone else, like I was just borrowing this quiet to catch my breath. I thought about all the things my father left behind, the building, the ledgers, the plans for the after-school program he never got to finish, and I thought about how quickly everyone else had decided it was just property, something to be divided, sold off, forgotten. I pressed my palm over my chest, trying to ease the ache that wouldn't leave. I knew if I let them, they would strip every meaning out of it. They would call it charity, call it weakness, call it foolish. But he had trusted me to be the keeper, and even if it cost me every relationship I had left, I wasn't ready to let go. I leaned forward and picked up the envelope again. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I traced his name with my fingertip. All at once, I could hear his voice as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. If one day this place is threatened, he'd said, "You have to be stronger than your fear." He hadn't said it as a challenge. He'd said it like a promise he believed I could keep. My throat tightened. I pressed the envelope to my chest, closing my eyes. Outside, a car passed on the street, headlights sweeping across the walls. I didn't move, didn't speak. I let his words fill up the space they left behind, and for the first time all day I felt something close to steady. The next morning I woke to a new message. David's name flashed across the screen, sharp and insistent. I braced myself and opened it. His words were short, stripped of any pretense. If you won't agree, we'll take this to court. Everyone will see you for what you really are. I stared at the phone until my vision blurred. I tried to remember the last time he spoke to me without that edge in his voice. I couldn't. I set the phone face down on the table. The quiet pressed in around me again, thicker than before. I knew he meant it. I knew they all did. But even with the threat hanging over me, I felt the smallest flicker of resolve, like a match striking in the dark. I picked up the phone again and scrolled to Mr. Carlyle's number. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was calm, like he'd expected me. "Margaret," he said, "I wondered when you'd ring." I swallowed, the tightness in my throat. "They're threatening to sue," I told him. "They say he wasn't thinking clearly." He didn't sound surprised. "That's their strongest angle," he said. "But your father's mental capacity was documented. His doctor signed off on the revisions." I exhaled, but it didn't ease the pressure in my chest. "I don't want a fight," I whispered. "I know," he said gently, "but sometimes protecting something means being ready for one." I closed my eyes, holding the phone to my ear. I didn't reply, but in the quiet I knew he was right. After I hung up, I sat by the window with a cup of cold coffee. I thought about the stories my father used to tell me about his own father, how my grandfather had lost the family farm, how cousins and uncles he trusted lined up to claim their share when the harvest failed. My father was only 12 when he watched the auction sign go up. He never forgot the way the fields looked under that hard winter sun. Empty. Claimed by people who'd never cared about the work it took to grow anything there. He built the community center because he wanted to leave something different behind, something no one could measure in dollars. I set the mug down on the sill. If I gave in now, I'd be proving he was right to worry, and I couldn't do that to him or to myself. That afternoon, I drove to the community center. The parking lot was almost empty. A single maintenance truck sat near the side door. I unlocked the front entrance and stepped inside. The air smelled like old paper and floor polish. For a moment, it felt like he might still be there, waiting in his office. I walked past the bulletin board covered in faded flyers, past the rows of chairs stacked neatly against the wall. In the main hall, his portrait hung over the reception desk. His eyes seemed to follow me as I moved closer, steady, unapologetic. I rested my hand against the edge of the desk. I remembered all the evenings I sat there doing homework while he met with families who needed help. This was the place he loved most, and I finally understood why. I unlocked the door to his office and stepped inside. The shelves were still lined with binders and boxes labeled in his careful script. I pulled open the top drawer of his desk. Under a stack of receipts, I found the old ledger he always kept close. The spine was worn soft from years of his hands. I set it gently on the desk and flipped through the pages. Dates, donations, expenses, every line written in blue ink. Near the back, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A line written in like small, deliberate letters. "If they ever try to sell this place, fight." My throat closed up. I pressed my palm over the words, feeling the steadiness he'd left behind. I whispered into the empty room, "I hear you, Dad." And for the first time, I believed I could do it. I closed the ledger and held it against my chest. It felt heavier than any document they had tried to push across that table. I stood there in the quiet office, letting the truth settle into my bones. He hadn't trusted a committee. He hadn't trusted polite agreements. He had trusted me. Outside the window, the late sun was sinking behind the trees. Golden light spilled across the floor, warming the old carpet. I traced the edge of his desk with my fingertips. I could almost hear his voice again telling me not to doubt myself. Even if the world called it foolish, even if everyone I loved turned their backs, I knew this place mattered. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. A small, quiet belief that maybe I was stronger than I thought. I locked the office and turned to leave. Near the front door, I almost walked past a woman stacking pamphlets into a display. Her hair was silver and pulled back in a neat bun. I recognized her, Maribel, who'd volunteered here for years. She looked up when she saw me. Her face softened into something close to relief. I hoped you'd come back, she said quietly. Your father always said you were the only one who really understood why he built this place. My throat tightened. I hadn't known he'd ever said that to anyone else. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Don't let them shame you into giving it up. This center changed more lives than you'll ever know. I nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in days, I didn't feel alone in the fight. The next morning, I got the notice. David had called for a special meeting of the board that oversaw the center's operations. I walked into the conference room and found him already there. His suit was crisp, his expression carefully neutral. Elaine sat at the far end, her hands folded tight in her lap. She didn't look up when I entered. David cleared his throat. Thank you for coming, he said, like it was any ordinary discussion. He slid a typed statement across the table. I'm formally requesting a vote to liquidate the property, he said, to prevent further conflict and ensure the assets are distributed fairly. I didn't reach for the paper. I looked him in the eye, steady as I could manage. You can call it fair, I said, my voice low, but it's still a betrayal. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. A link popped up from an unknown number. I hesitated before tapping it open. A local paper, an article with a headline that made my stomach twist. Daughter blocks families' access to inheritance, claims moral right to property. My father's picture sat next to mine, side by side, like a comparison I hadn't agreed to. I scrolled down, skimming the quotes. Anonymous sources, family insiders, all hinting I was selfish, unstable, ungrateful. I closed my eyes and let the phone rest in my palm. The words blurred together. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to call the reporter, to explain everything, but another part knew it wouldn't matter. They had already chosen the story they wanted to tell. That night my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. My mother's voice came through, brittle and sharp. I hope you're happy, she said. You've humiliated this family. I stayed silent, gripping the arm of the couch to keep my hand steady. You think he loved you more? She went on, her tone rising. You think that makes you better than us? I closed my eyes. I pictured my father in his office, writing in that ledger he never let her touch. I tried to let that memory drown out her voice. You're tearing everything apart, she said, softer now, like she was tired of her own anger. Before I could reply, she hung up. The line went dead in my hand, leaving nothing but a hollow quiet. I didn't expect another message that night, but just before midnight my phone buzzed again. Elaine's name glowed on the screen. Her text was only 2 sentences. I'm sorry, I don't know how to stand up to them. I read it twice, then set the phone face down on the table. Part of me wanted to call her, to tell her I understood, but the truth was, I didn't. I had spent my whole life stepping aside so no one would be angry, and I couldn't do it anymore. I looked around the quiet living room, feeling the cost of every choice. The distance growing between all of us. The grief I didn't know how to name. I whispered into the empty space, I'm sorry too. When the house went quiet again, I sat on the floor beside the couch, my legs folded tight against my chest like I could hold myself together if I stayed small enough. I thought about every Christmas morning in that living room, every birthday dinner where I felt like an afterthought, every time I'd told myself family was worth any sacrifice. I pressed my forehead to my knees. The truth was, I'd been alone in this long before my father died. Now there was no one left to pretend for. No one to stand between me and their disappointment. A small voice inside me whispered that maybe this was freedom, that letting go of who they wanted me to be was the first honest thing I'd ever done. But in that moment, all it felt like was loss. When the sun came up, I hadn't slept. I moved to the window and watched the light spill across the street, soft and slow. I thought about the building my father left me, how he had called it his life's work, how he'd trusted me to protect it when he couldn't anymore. I pressed my palm to the glass, feeling the cold seep into my skin. If I signed their papers, the center would be gone within months. A memory traded for a payout. I thought about every child who had walked through those doors, every family that found help when no one else would give it. I took a deep breath. Even if it meant standing alone, I couldn't be the one to erase all of that. In the quiet, I finally understood this was the last piece of him I still believed in. That afternoon, another envelope arrived by courier. I signed for it with hands that didn't feel like mine. Inside was a formal proposal typed and stamped, David's name at the top in bold letters. They were offering me a compromise, 60% of the value in cash if I agreed to sell. The promise that the building would keep my father's name on the sign out front, as if that would make it feel any less hollow. I sat at the kitchen table, the papers spread out in front of me. My eyes moved over the words, but none of it looked real. I imagined them celebrating when it was done, calling it closure, telling themselves they'd honored his memory while they divided the profits. My hands were steady when I folded the offer back into its envelope. I already knew my answer. I called Mr. Carlyle as the sun slipped below the rooftops. He had picked up on the first ring like he'd been waiting. They made an offer, I said. My voice sounded flat, even to me. He was quiet for a moment. Is it something you want to consider? I looked at the envelope on the table. The neat columns of numbers, the polite language trying to dress up surrender. No, I said finally. I just needed to hear it out loud. He exhaled, and I could almost picture him leaning back in his chair. Then you know where you stand, he said. And they know you're not going to fold. I closed my eyes. I'm scared, I whispered. I know, he said gently, but you're still doing the right thing. For the first time all week, I believed him. I didn't bother trying to sleep. I made tea, I didn't drink, and stood in the doorway of the spare room. Boxes of my father's records were stacked along the walls. His handwriting peeked out from every folder, a reminder of all the things he left unfinished. I pulled out the old ledger again and set it on the kitchen table. I flipped through the pages, slowly tracing each line he'd written. Every entry felt like proof he'd trusted me. Not David, not my mother, me. I rested my hand on the cover and felt the ache in my chest ease just a little. I knew by morning they'd come back with something else, more threats, more guilt. But tonight in the quiet, I finally felt certain I wasn't going to give them what they wanted. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky turned pale. The ledger still lay open in front of me. My eyes drifted to the window, and for a moment, I could almost see him out there. Paint-stained work clothes, that tired patient smile he saved just for me. I remembered the last time we painted the main hall together, how he'd insisted on doing the trim himself even though his hands had started to shake. You can always fix the edges, he'd told me, but you have to lay the foundation right the first time. I pressed my hand over my mouth, feeling the tears I'd been holding back. It was such a small memory, but it felt like everything that mattered. I took a shaky breath and wiped my eyes. I knew what he would want me to do next. When the first light filled the kitchen, I closed the ledger and set it aside. My hands were steady now. My heart felt clearer than it had in weeks. I picked up the envelope with David's offer and held it over the trash. For one last moment, I hesitated. Not because I doubted my choice, but because I knew what it would cost me. Then I let it fall. The papers landed in the bin without a sound. I stood there in the quiet, feeling the finality of it settle in my chest. No more negotiations. No more pretending we could all walk away happy. I went to the sink and rinsed my hands under cold water. When I turned off the tap, the silence felt different. Not empty, just honest. I called David that afternoon and told him to meet me at the center. He didn't argue, he just said fine and hung up. When I walked into the main hall, they were already waiting. David, my mother, and Elaine all sitting in a row like they had rehearsed it. I set my bag on the table and pulled out the ledger. I didn't bother sitting. This is the record of every donation, every loan, every hour he gave to this place, I said. No one is selling it. David's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. My mother's voice was low and cold. You're choosing a building over your family. I looked her in the eye. No, I said. I'm choosing the promise I made to him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother's face twisted into something I'd never seen before. You ungrateful girl, she hissed. You've always thought you were better than us. David shook his head slowly. All this righteousness, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. You think it makes you noble? It just makes you alone. Elaine looked down at her hands. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I felt my heart beat once hard and certain. Their words didn't sting the way they used to. They sounded tired, like an old argument no one believed anymore. I took a breath and rested my hand on the ledger. Whatever came next, I was done asking for their permission. I looked at each of them in turn. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. You can call me selfish, I said. You can say I'm tearing this family apart, but I'm not the one who forgot what he stood for. David opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. I won't sign anything, I said. I won't sell this place. My mother let out a brittle laugh like she couldn't believe I'd really said it. Elaine's eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Regret, maybe? Or relief? I straightened my shoulders. I'm not here to argue anymore. I'm here to protect what he built. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of their disappointment. I felt free. No one tried to stop me when I picked up my bag. David just stared at the floor, jaw clenched tight. My mother turned her face away as if she couldn't stand to look at me. Elaine's lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. I paused at the doorway, feeling the weight of everything we'd just lost. Or maybe everything we'd never really had. I thought about all the years I'd tried to be what they needed. How small I'd made myself so they wouldn't feel threatened. Not anymore. Not ever again. I stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me. The quiet felt clean, almost peaceful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering if they would follow. I knew they wouldn't. And I was ready to walk on without them. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the work. I met with local leaders, donors, and volunteers who still believed in my father's vision. The center needed repairs, updates, a new plan for the future. It was more than a building, it was a lifeline for so many. I started a scholarship fund for the kids who used the center's programs. Every application reminded me why this fight mattered. Some nights were hard, lonely. But each success, no matter how small, was a step forward. I was no longer just preserving the past. I was building something new. And slowly, the center began to feel like home again. One evening, my phone buzzed softly, a message from Elaine. I'm proud of you. I stared at the words longer than I expected. They felt heavy with everything left unsaid between us. For years, we had drifted apart, caught in the middle of family storms. But now something was shifting. I typed back a simple reply, thank you. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this fight wouldn't break us completely. Maybe there was a way forward, not as the family they wanted us to be, but as the one we could choose to become. The day of the reopening arrived brighter than I expected. The center buzzed with laughter, voices, and hopeful energy. I stood on the small stage in the main hall, looking out at the crowd. Families, volunteers, friends all here because they believed in this place too. I placed my hand on the podium, feeling the wood warm beneath my fingers. My father built this center not just as a building, but as a promise to every child who walks through these doors. The room was silent for a moment, then the applause came slow at first, then filling every corner of the room. I smiled, feeling the weight lift. This was more than I had ever hoped to protect. It was a legacy worth fighting for. Later that evening, I sat alone in my father's old office. The ledger lay open on the desk, its pages soft under my fingers. I looked out the window at the center glowing softly in the twilight. The hum of life inside felt like a heartbeat, steady and strong. I whispered to the empty room. Some inheritances are measured in money. Mine was measured in purpose. A quiet peace settled over me, deeper than any applause. I wasn't just carrying on his legacy, I was living it. And in that moment, I finally felt rich. Not because of what I had, but because of what I chose to protect. If this story touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next journey we explore together. Thank you for watching and being part of this community.